Welcome to today's Explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled you're here because today we're tackling a really fascinating everyday rivalry. We are pitting the fuel that cooks our dinners against the fuel that drives our daily commutes. Now you see these acronyms literally all the time, right? LPG, CNG. But how much do we really know about the invisible energy that's powering our lives?
So here's kind of a wild question to start us off. Have you ever looked at that heavy metal gas cylinder attached to your backyard barbecue and thought, hey, could I hook this up to my car? Or, vice versa, could you pipe the fuel from a city bus directly into your kitchen stove? Are these two everyday fuels basically just different names for the exact same thing, or are they totally different beasts? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack today.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's how our showdown is going to play out. First, we'll meet the gas contenders. Second, we'll crown the clean energy champion. Third, it's energy punch versus economy. Fourth, the safety showdown. And finally, we'll look at the cost of switching.
All right, round one, meet the gas contenders. We're looking at chemistry and storage here.
In one corner, we have our commuter's choice, which is CNG, or compressed natural gas. This is the driving force behind a ton of autos, taxis, and city buses. On a chemical level, it's primarily made up of methane. Actually, methane makes up a whopping 90 to 95% of this fuel. Now, stepping into the other corner, we've got our kitchen champion, LPG, or liquefied petroleum gas. This is the stuff you're using for household cooking and heating. Instead of methane, LPG is this mixture of flammable hydrocarbons, mainly propane and butane. So right out of the gate, you can see they are chemically distinct.
But, the differences definitely don't stop at their chemical makeup. How we actually store them is completely different too. Just look at this massive contrast in pressure. CNG is stored in a purely gaseous form, and to fit enough of it into a tank to actually be useful, it has to be kept under extremely high pressure. I mean, we're talking 200 to 250 bar. That is an insane amount of pressure. LPG, on the other hand, is much more relaxed. It's stored as a liquid under relatively low pressure, typically just around 10 to 15 bar. It basically just chills out as a liquid until you open the valve. Moving on to round two, the clean energy champion. Let's look at the environmental impact. Now we have a definitive winner in this category, no question. CNG is widely considered the absolute cleanest burning fossil fuel available today. When you burn CNG, it emits significantly fewer greenhouse gases and drastically less particulate matter into the air. So if we're looking at the environmental scorecard here, CNG is miles and miles ahead. By contrast, LPG simply cannot compete on the green front. Don't get me wrong, it's incredibly useful and super efficient for cooking our meals, but it produces a much heavier carbon footprint. When it's burned, LPG outputs a really substantial amount of carbon dioxide compared to our commuter counterpart. So, unfortunately for the atmosphere, the kitchen fuel loses out to the vehicle fuel big time.
All right, round three, energy punch versus economy. Let's talk about the power paradox.
Now, what's really interesting here is this massive number, 90 to 95 megajoules per cubic meter. This represents LPG's calorific value. Basically, it's raw energy punch, and it completely dwarfs CNG, which only sits at around 35 to 40 megajoules per cubic meter. So per unit, LPG packs a way bigger, much more powerful punch. You'd think that makes it the ultimate vehicle fuel, right?
Actually, scratch that. No! This is where the power paradox comes in. Despite having way less raw energy, CNG generally offers much higher fuel efficiency and lower running costs per kilometer for vehicles. Think of it like this. LPG is the heavy lister. It's got a ton of raw, intense energy that's perfect for generating high heat, like to boil a pot of water super quickly. But CNG is the marathon runner. It utilizes its energy in a way that gives you incredibly efficient, steady mileage out on the road. So when it comes to vehicle economy, CNG beats LPG hands down.
Okay, let's shift gears to round four, the safety showdown. We're calling this one balloons versus puddles.
So the fundamental difference in safety really comes down to density. CNG is lighter than air. If there happens to be a leak in a CNG vehicle, the gas immediately rises and disperses super rapidly into the open atmosphere. It's kind of like a helium balloon slipping out of your hand, right? It just floats away, which drastically reduces the risk of a concentrated fire. LPG, however, is heavier than air. So if a leak occurs, it doesn't float away. It sinks. It settles and accumulates right down near the ground. Honestly, very much like a puddle of spilled water. And let me tell you, that invisible puddle of LPG is incredibly dangerous. Because it pools right there on the floor, it really increases the risk of accidental ignition from everyday things, like maybe a dropped cigarette or ground-level sparks. Plus, LPG has a lower ignition temperature than CNG, which means it requires way less heat to catch fire, and it's highly flammable. So, an invisible, easily ignited puddle? That is a serious hazard.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why your kitchen gas smells so completely terrible on purpose. Since an LPG leak is essentially an invisible, heavy puddle of danger, manufacturers add an artificial chemical called ethyl mercaptan to the cylinders. Natural LPG is actually totally odorless, but this foul-smelling additive, it ensures that if there's a leak pooling near your floorboards, your nose is going to detect it long before a spark ever does. It's literally a brilliant, life-saving addition.
All right, the final round. Round 5, the cost of switching. Upfront versus long-term.
So the crucial point here is balancing the short-term pain against the long-term gain. Remember earlier how we talked about CNG needing 200 to 250 bar of pressure? Well, because of that extreme pressure, installing a CNG conversion kit in a vehicle requires heavy-duty, highly specialized cylinders. And that leads to step 1, a really high initial cost. It's expensive to get the equipment installed. But if you can stomach that upfront cost, you hit step 2, which is the long-term rewards. Because of its incredible fuel economy, CNG is generally much more cost-effective per kilometer than LPG. So yeah, you pay more on day 1, but you're saving money every single time you drive.
Which brings us to our final thought. We've seen that CNG absolutely dominates as the clean energy champion and the master of fuel economy, all while safely floating away during a leak. LPG, on the other hand, remains our heavy-lifting, high-energy kitchen champion, even if it does require a super stinky additive to keep us safe from its invisible puddles. But when it really comes down to hitting the road, the question remains for you. Is the high-pressure, expensive initial hurdle of a CNG conversion kit worth a greener, cheaper future for your daily commute? It really is a delicate balance of upfront investment versus long-term financial and environmental payoff. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today, and I'll see you next time as we continue to unpack the fascinating world around us.